What started as a routine late-night interview turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in talk show history. Mark Wahlberg came to promote a movie. But within minutes, he was facing off against Jimmy Kimmel in a raw, unscripted exchange that had the audience holding its breath. What really happened behind those smiles? And why did it end with a room so silent you could hear reputations breaking? You think you're a role model now? That's rich. The sentence hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. But rewind just 3 minutes, and the stage looked nothing like a meltdown site. Mark Wahlberg stepped onto the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live, with that practiced half-smile millions, recognized somewhere between boyish charm and Boston toughness. The studio lights warmed his face as the crowd applauded. The band played, and Jimmy rose from behind his desk, grinning like it was just another night, just another guest. Mark wore a slate gray suit, sharply tailored. He adjusted his cuffs as he walked across the stage and gave Jimmy a hug that felt more like mutual agreement than affection. They exchanged pleasantries, brief but warm. As Mark took his seat, he leaned back with the confidence of a man who'd done this 100 times. Mark Wahlberg, everybody. Jimmy beamed. Back again. You never age, man. I think you're secretly made of granite. Laughter. Applause. Smooth banter safe. Mark chuckled. Clean living, man. And kids who won't let me sit down. Jimmy smiled, eyes twinkling but not quite warm. We're going to talk about your new movie. Obviously, it looks like a wild ride. It is gritty, real, close to the bone. The kind of story that hits where it hurts. Just like your Boston roots, Jimmy said with a smirk, then glanced off stage so quickly you'd miss it. But Mark caught it. The camera panned briefly across the set and lingered half a second. Too long on a folder at the edge of Jimmy's desk. Thick manila, marked in red. Past files. Next to it, a crew member leaned toward the stage manager, whispered something, then looked quickly at Mark before turning away. Mark shifted in his seat. Jimmy kept talking. Before we dive into the film, though, I thought we'd have a little fun. You've had quite the journey. Markups, downs, arrests, redemption, box office hits. And now, Hollywood statesmen. Laughter. A few claps. Mark's smile flickered. Jimmy held his hands up. Relax. We're not going full therapy session. Just thought we'd take a stroll down memory lane. A few clips. Some laughs. Nothing too damaging unless you've got skeletons. I don't know about. Lodge? The crowd laughed. Mark looked at the folder, then back at Jimmy. There was something behind that grin now, not just mischief-precision. Jimmy leaned forward, voice lower, warmer. Let's have some fun with your journey today. Mark tilted his head slightly, then leaned back again like a boxer sizing up a punch he hadn't seen coming but knew was coming. His fingers tapped twice on the armrest. The audience didn't notice the shift, but Mark did. So did the man behind the camera. The lights dimmed slightly, and Jimmy turned to the screen behind them, gesturing with practiced flair. All right, let's roll that trailer. You guys are going to love this action. Heart, Wahlberg, with a beard, what more could you want? The audience clapped. Mark relaxed. And in this was the moment his team had scheduled the clip they'd approved. The safe zone. He adjusted his collar, ready for the applause and polite banter that followed a good action cut. But the screen didn't light up with cinematic visuals. No sweeping score, no studio logo. Instead, grainy footage flickered to life. Low-resolution video of a teenage Mark Wahlberg, shirtless, shouting in a thick Boston accent at a police cruiser. Distorted colors. Shaky frame. Over it, someone had added a bright red filter. Comic Sans text. Future Oscar nominee. In the corner, Dorchester Thug Life. Compilation volume. A laugh track. Played, cruel, looped. The audience laughed harder than they should have. Mark didn't move. The screen cut to another clip. Mark in handcuffs being led out of a courtroom. The footage paused, zoomed in, and cartoon jail bars slammed over his face with a coaching sound. More laughter. Mark slowly turned toward Jimmy, Jimmy was chuckling, hands spread. Hey, come on! We all have our teenage rebellion phase, right? The audience laughed again, this time with a few awkward coughs. The energy shifted Hoost slightly, not enough for everyone to notice. But Mark not to say it. That wasn't the trailer, he said quietly. Jimmy leaned back, still smiling. No. We'll get to the trailer in a sec. I just thought a little trip down memory lane never hurt anybody. Keeps us humble, doesn't it? Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced past the camera to the control booth and saw the director avoid his gaze. The same crew member from before now stared at the monitor, lips pressed thin. This was cleared, Mark asked. Voice level but low. Jimin raised his hands. Hey, just jokes. Man, it's late night TV. No harm, no foul. You're a big boy. You can take it. Mark didn't smile. That's not what you said backstage. Jimmy blinked. What? You said we'd keep it classy. Said it'd be about the work, the film, your words. You respected the journey. Jimmy shrugged, trying to laugh it off. Come on, you know how it is. Audience wants some juice. Besides, you've been through worse, haven't you? A beat of silence. Then Mark chuckled. Not warm, but cold, hollow. Yeah, I've been through worse. Doesn't mean I signed up for it again. Jimmy's smile faltered. The screen behind them went dark for a long moment. Neither spoke. The audience, unsure if this was a rehearsed bit or a real shift in tone, fell into a restless hush. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You think that's funny? Jimmy hesitated. It's entertaining. It's a show. No, Mark said. It's humiliation with applause. A few people in the front row exchanged uneasy glances. One woman lowered her phone. Another stopped clapping mid-motion. Jimmy tried to steer back. Look, Mark, it's all part of the package. You've done incredible things since then. People love a redemption story. You mean they love tearing someone down so they can pretend to cheer for the rebuild? Mark replied, eyes locked on Jimmy. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. You're taking this really seriously. Man, Mark didn't blink. You're not taking it seriously enough. Silence again, longer this time. Uncomfortable. Finally, Jimmy chuckled nervously and turned to the audience. Let's just say the new film is nothing compared to Wahlberg's real-life origin story. Forced laughter. Mark sat back, saying nothing. Jimmy cleared his throat. All right, let's run the actual trailer, please. From the booth, a producer's voice crackled into Jimmy's earpiece, just audible. We've got the trailer ready when you are. But Jimmy didn't hit play not yet. He looked at Mark for the first time all night. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He shifted in his chair, forced a casual grin, and waved to the booth. All right. Let's reset the mood here. Let's talk about the movie. He chuckled too loudly. You play a former convict, trying to turn his life around. Kinda typecasting, huh? A ripple of laughter ran through the audience, but it didn't fully catch. Something in the room had shifted. Mark didn't answer immediately. He sat still, expression unreadable, then gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's called authentic. The character's trying to do better. I can relate. Jimmy leaned forward, fingers steepled. Sure. But you know what's interesting? You've said a lot over the years about being proud of your roots. The whole working-class Boston thing. Blue collar. To big screen. American grit. He nodded slowly, leading into a punchline. But when you say that from a private jet wearing a Rolex, it starts sounding like a brand more than a belief. A few in the crowd let out surprised, hesitant laughs. Mark smiled again, tighter this time. He adjusted his cuff slowly, not looking at Jimmy. You know what's funny? You call that a contradiction. I call it growth. I earned everything I have. Didn't inherit it. Didn't marry into it. Didn't fake being poor for street cred. I bled for it. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, lips twitching, touchy. Hey, no offense. Just calling out what people might be thinking. People, Mark echoed. Well, critics, commentators, the internet, Jimmy said, tone to breezy. You know how it is. Everyone's got an opinion. Mark tilted his head. Right? But you're not everyone. You're sitting there choosing what to say, what clip to run, what line to cross. Jimmy shrugged. Relax, man. It's just a show. You've done tougher interviews. Mark leaned in slightly. Yeah, but they were honest. Jimmy smiled, trying to lighten the air. Come on. You can take it. You're the tough guy, remember? Then, with a quick flick of his hand and a voice full of mock curiosity, he asked, You think your kids admire this persona? Silence. That one hit. Mark blinked once, slowly, then straightened. His voice dropped an octave. You want to talk about my kids? Jimmy looked momentarily unsure but pressed on. I'm just saying, do they look at this? I don't know. This tough guy image, you see a hero or a mask? The silence cracked like ice. Mark's palm came down on the desk. Between them, not violent, not out of control, but final. Loud enough that the audience flinched. The sound bounced off the walls. The band stopped. Someone in the crowd gasped. The cameraman jerked slightly. A producer in the control room muttered something that wasn't meant to be heard. Mark leaned forward, voice low, sharp as a knife. My family is not your punchline. Jimmy opened his mouth, closed it, tried to smirk and failed. Mark wasn't done. You can bring up my past, my mistakes. Tatesi. Fair. Tatesi. Mine. On Italiano. But don't ever drag my kids into your bit. They're not here to defend themselves. They didn't sign up for this circus. The audience was silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Jimmy looked at the crowd, then back at Mark. It was just a question. No, Mark said. It was a line, and you knew it. Jimmy leaned back, visibly uncomfortable. This is getting blown out of proportion. Is it? Mark, ask it, because I see a guy who smiles while twisting the knife, who calls cruelty a segment. You think that's journalism? Entertainment. It's cowardice. Jimmy inhaled, trying to speak, but Mark stood slowly not, leaving, just rising. Taller. Calmer. The control in his posture made it worse, more threatening than shouting ever could. Mark looked around the studio. You all think this is funny? He asked, genuinely. No one answered. He turned back to Jimmy. I came here to talk about a film, about redemption, about people who screw up and try to make things right. But I guess that's boring. Not enough views. Huh. Jimmy's throat worked silently. He tapped his pen twice, cleared his throat. Mark sat back, eyes never leaving Jimmy. Let's talk about the movie, Jimmy, he said quietly. Before you lose more than the room. He lowered into his chair slowly, movements measured, almost theatrical in restraint. He exhaled deeply, then let his eyes wander not to Jimmy, not to the crowd, but straight into the camera, the one used for the tight shot, broadcasting 2 millions at home. For a moment, everything else fell away. The lights, the tension, the trap. What remained was a man staring into the lens, like it was a window to something deeper. You know, it's funny, he said, quiet but unwavering. You pretend this is harmless. You dress it up with jokes, jingles, laugh tracks, but what you do, what this is humiliation for applause. The studio went still. Even the air felt heavier. Jimmy shifted in his seat, forced a quick chuckle that went nowhere. Mark, buddy. But Mark didn't look at him. His eyes stayed with the camera, with the audience beyond it. get the Italiano. This is the game, right? You poke, prod, find the soft spots. If someone flinches, you win. If they don't, you dig deeper until they bleed on your carpet. He blinked once. But here's what you don't get, Jimmy. You're not the only one who's been watching. Finally, he turned back, voice sharp. I've spent decades rebuilding from the damage I caused to others, to myself. I've apologized, paid the price. Donate to work not to be forgiven by everyone, but to be better than the kid I used to be. Jimmy opened his mouth, but Mark cut him off, tone rising only slightly. I was violent, but I changed. You stayed smiling. The words landed like a slap. The audience didn't gasp or murmur. They just stopped breathing. You stayed smiling while turning other people's lowest moments into punchlines. That's your hustle. That's your art. He leaned forward. You don't swing fists, Jimmy. You swing sound bites, and you do it with a smirk. Jimmy gave a small shake of the head, reaching for his mug. Mark, come on, no, Mark said. Not this time. He looked at the crowd. You see a clip online of me at 17. Angry, out of control. You laughed because someone added music and framed it like a blooper reel. That wasn't funny. That was real. That was someone spiraling, someone hurting, and yeah, I caused damage. No excuses, but I've spent every day since trying to own it, trying to fix it. He turned back to Jimmy. What have you cleaned up? Jimmy looked stunned, caught between denial and defense. You call it entertainment, Mark said, but it's not. It's erosion. It chips away at people. You bring them in with smiles and coffee mugs, and then you've got them in front of an audience trained to laugh on cue. A few in the front row shifted uncomfortably. A man in the middle row uncrossed his arms, unsure what show he was now a part of. Mark's voice soft not to soothe, but to press. You know the difference between us. When I was hurting people, I knew it was wrong. I knew it was survival. I knew I'd pay for it. But you do it clean, polished, scripted, and you call it charm. Jimmy tried again, voice thin. You came here to promote a movie. If you didn't want to talk about your past, I came here thinking we'd talk about the film, Mark said, because it's about redemption, about a man trying to fix what's broken. I thought maybe we could have that conversation, honestly, human to human. Jimmy raised a hand, frustration slipping through. Then why are you making this so dramatic? Mark tilted his head slightly. Because there's nothing funny about tearing people down for sport, and you know it? The silence thickened. No band cues, no jokes. Even the cameras seemed unsure whether to keep rolling. Mark's bike ran a hand down his face and looked into the crowd. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm too sensitive. But I've got 4 kids who will see this, and I want them to see their dad hold his ground not out of anger, but because he remembers what it's like to be on the edge of losing everything. The audience listened like they were in a church. Mark turned back to Jimmy. You've got reach or influence. You could use it to uplift, to challenge without cruelty. But you won't, because cruelty is easy. It's clean. Eat. Sells. Jimmy said nothing. The control booth flashed a red light for a commercial break, but no one moved. No one dared. Mark stood again slower this time. No threat. Just presence. He extended a hand toward Jimmy, not for a handshake. Not for peace. Just a gesture. Open. Honest. You wanted to talk about my journey, Jimmy? He said. There it is. Raw. Imperfect. Unfiltered. Maybe not what you wanted, but definitely what you asked for. He sat back down, folded his hands, and waited. This time, the silence belonged to him. Mark stayed still for a long moment, hands calmly folded, like a man with nothing left to prove. Jimmy said nothing. The usual rhythm of the show, the banter, the setup, the punchline had evaporated into an almost sacred quiet. The audience didn't move. No one laughed. Even the floor crew hesitated, unsure whether to reset the cameras or leave them fixed on the scene unfolding. Mark took a slow, measured breath, then leaned forward slightly, voice lowered as if inviting the room closer. "You know," he began, "there was this guy. His name doesn't matter. He was Vietnamese. I was 15. Angry, lost. Thought power came from fists, from fear." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "I hurt him for no reason but the color of his skin and the weight of my own ignorance. I ran from it for years. Thought maybe if I buried it deep enough, it would go away. But it doesn't. It never does." Someone coughed in the back, but no one turned. They were fully locked in. "Eventually," Mark continued, "I found him, sought him out, sat in front of him, looked him in the eye, and said, 'Oh, sorry. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I knew I didn't deserve it. But I told him the truth about who I was, about who I wanted to be.'" Jimmy shifted in his chair, inching back. The discomfort was no longer subtle. It radiated. "I've done more than apologize," Mark went on. "I've worked with Kitsta, same kind I used to run with. Helped build programs, jobs, schools, not for credit, but because I owe. I owe for what I did, for what I represented. Every time I see my mother smile, every time I tuck my daughter in, I remember I didn't grow up with guarantees. I grew up with rage, with hunger, with noise, and if I'm lucky, maybe I can turn that into something better." He turned to Jimmy, voice calm, but the calm was different. Not politeness, but control, precision. "So when you sit there and laugh at my past, when you use it as a setup for a bit, I don't just hear a joke. I hear a dismissal. I hear a man who's never had to ask for forgiveness, mocking someone who begs for it every morning." Jimmy opened his mouth, but Mark leaned closer, eyes steady. "Let me ask you something. Jimmy, how many apologies have you faked on this stage? How many times have you stared into that camera and said, 'I'm sorry,' because your PR team told you to? How many statements have you read that you didn't write? How many times have you said the words, but never meant them?" Jimmy looked down at his hands. One tightened slightly on the cue card in his lap. Mark nodded slowly. "You bully with cue cards and call it comedy." A woman in the second row gasped softly, looking toward the stage like she had just seen something collapse. Mark didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You call people out for old tweets, for slips of the tongue. You blast them in monologues, then shake their hand in the next segment like nothing happened. But it does happen, over and over, because you've turned moral outrage into prime-time content. The studio was silent. The silence had weight. It pressed on shoulders and curled at the edges of the cameras. "And here's the thing," Mark added. "You never get your hands dirty. Not really. You don't punch. You don't shout. You smile. You lean back. You play the good guy while you cut someone apart with applause behind you. You get the cheers. They get the scars." Jimmy finally looked up, voice thin. "I'm not." Mark raised a hand, gently. "Don't. Not. Not yet." He stood again, not to leave, just to level. "You say this is just comedy, just a show. But when people watch you, te quiz, when you laugh at someone's pain, they learn to do the same, and it spreads, one laugh at a time." He looked to the audience, not accusing, not pleading, just honest. "I came here to talk about a movie about a man who finds himself broken and fights like hell to rebuild. But somewhere along the way, you decided the broken part was the headline, and the fight not worth airtime." There was a pause. Then a man in the third row stood. Stood. No clapping, no shouting. A moment later, someone else rose beside him. Then a woman across the aisle. Quiet. Still. Jimmy said nothing. Mark turned back to him. "You asked me here. You asked for my story. Well, this is it. The real one. The real one. Not the version cut into a 30-second reel with punchlines. The one that hurts. The one that heals. The one that doesn't fit your script. Jimmy stared, eyes glassy, unsure whether to respond or retreat. There was nowhere to go. No reset button. No commercial break big enough to undo what had just been said. Mark took a step back, inhaled, and sat again. This isn't your punchline, Jimmy. This is my life. And tonight, you don't get to write it. Jimmy let out a thin, nervous laugh, tugged at his blazer as if adjusting fabric could fix the unraveling moment. Relax, he said, attempting a grin. We were just having fun. Mark's chair creaked as he rose, tall and unheard, not angry, but purposeful. That's the problem, he said. Voice calm as still water. You think cruelty is fun? Jimmy blinked. The smirk died. For a moment, he froze, eyes darting toward the control booth, the cameras, the stunned faces in front of him. He yanked his microphone from his collar and slammed it onto the desk. Who cleared that tape? He snapped toward stage right, voice cutting like glass. I said, run the trailer, not that. Heads turned. A producer shrank behind the monitor. The stage manager avoided his gaze. A camera operator looked down, shifting the lens. No one answered. Mark didn't move. He watched, observe not, with judgment, but with gravity, as if witnessing the quiet collapse of something that had stood too long on shaky ground. Jimmy rifled through the cue cards in his lap, looking for a lifeline buried in paper. In one swift motion, he tossed them onto the desk. Some slid to the floor. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what you want from me, he muttered, more to the room than to Mark or the audience. Mark stepped forward. Not toward Jimmy, but to the front edge of the stage, near the camera, hands folded loosely, posture steady. The lights caught his eyes, not glaring, but clear. I didn't come here to fight, he said, addressing the silence. I came here because I believe this was still a place for conversation, for honesty, maybe even for growth. But maybe that's asking too much from a stage built for spectacle. Jimmy leaned forward, elbows on the desk, head in his hands. His show, his format, his carefully orchestrated illusion. Shot in the wings, a boom mic hovered, hesitating. No one gave direction. The crew, veterans of hundreds of shows, stood like statues. Mark turned halfway, addressing Jimmy directly. I know what it's like to be out of control. I've lived it, owned it, buried people with it, but I never pretended it was charm. And when I finally learned to stop, he said, I stopped expecting people to clap for the damage. He gave the audience a final glance. Some were still standing, others sitting, all breathless. Then Mark nodded once and walked off stage, not with flourish, not with fury, but with finality. The lights didn't fade. The cameras didn't cut. The show didn't end. It just broke. Applause came slowly at first, then in waves, raw, unrehearsed, real. People rose row by row, not cheering, not whistling, just clapping. The camera drifted, capturing stunned and thoughtful faces. A woman wiped her cheek. A young man nodded. They weren't watching a celebrity, they were watching a reckoning. Backstage, Jimmy sat alone at his desk, shoulders slumped. The microphone lay discarded, cue cards scattered like debris, fingers interlaced, pressed against his lips, eyes staring ahead but seeing nothing. A producer stood just out of frame, headset in hand, shaking his head. Technicians moved quietly, coiling cables, lowering boom arms with care. No one looked at Jimmy, not disrespect, but recognition. Something had ended. No one knew what came next. Across the country, millions watched. Phones leaked up. Screenshots flooded timelines. Clips of Mark S. final monologue circulated instantly. Social media ignited. The hashtag you stayed smiling trended within 20 minutes. People weren't laughing. They were watching, listening, replaying. By midnight, news outlets declared it the most confrontational moment in late-night history. The New York Times ran, Mark Wahlberg didn't walk out. Stood up. Before edits. Before spin. One voice cut through the noise. Narrator. Low. Steady. Almost whispered. In a world where laughs are cheap, truth costs everything. The screen faded to black.